And the past week has not just been a tragedy for Israel, but a real shock to the global order as well, and America's place in it. Now, I'm very pleased to be joined now by Wall Street Journal editor-at-large Gerard Baker. You may have seen his columns in the Australian newspaper, and he's also the author of American Breakdown, which is all about the trust deficit in American society and how institutions, politicians, and ordinary citizens can work to get it back. Gerard, welcome to the program, and I'm sorry it can't be under happier circumstances, but I wanted to bring you on to ask you, first of all, about your latest writing about Hamas's barbaric attack and the New World disorder, you call it, under Biden. And you've said that we must understand the strategic context that demands an accounting of the role the U.S. has played in the genesis of this tragedy. Talk us through what you mean here.
Yeah, James. Well, first of all, thanks. Pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, look, I mean, the first thing to say, crystal clear, the responsibility for this absolute monstrosity lies solely with Hamas, with these bloodthirsty savages who've committed this just simply, I mean, an astonishing act of depravity that, you know, just defies any kind of understanding of moral code or law or anything else whatsoever. So I want to be clear, that's where the blame lies. But it does need to be understood, of course, in the broader context of what's been going on in between Israel and the Palestinians, but also in the broader Middle East. And I think what worries me and what worries a lot of us over here, and I'm sure worries a lot of people in Australia too, is what we've seen in the last, frankly, not just in the Biden administration, although we can talk about what Biden's done, but over the last 2 decades, a series of American disasters in the Middle East. And, you know, during the Cold War, the Middle East was to some extent a sort of a strategic battleground between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then after the Cold War, the United States was the power that dominated the world, dominated that region. And by and large, you know, things, although there was never complete peace, there were always these outbreaks of violence. By and large, the U.S. presence there, the fact that the U.S. was this enormously important and engaged power, meant that it kept a lid on the sort of spiraling into chaos that was always at risk of happening. I think what we've seen, beginning with the disastrous war in Iraq, which was a disaster, one of the biggest calamities in American foreign policy history, the forces that unleashed, the power that gave to Iran. Then, of course, you came after Bush. You had Barack Obama, who went in exactly the opposite direction: chaotic, unfocused, completely disordered approach to the region, terrible mess he made in Libya, the terrible disaster in Syria, where the United States, first of all, threatened to intervene and then did nothing. And then now, of course, then you had Trump. Trump, I think, to be fair, and I'm not Trump's biggest fan, but Trump did manage to make some achievements in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords in particular, and at least restore the sense that the United States was actually a serious player in the Middle East. And then Biden came along and, frankly, just repeated the mistakes that Obama has made. So that has created this vacuum in the Middle East, absence of the United States, into which particularly Iran, other powers, but particularly Iran, has emerged as one of the strongest powers. Yeah. And again, this is what's so frustrating is the Biden administration has been appeasing Iran and allowing Iran to cement its power in the region.
Well, that's a really interesting thing here, and I'm glad you brought up Iraq, too, because it seems like from almost 9/11, everything that the U.S. has done, either accidentally or by design, has been to empower Tehran, which, of course, since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution, has been the country that views the U.S. as the great Satan. What do you think about this theory, though, that the Biden administration is basically the third term of the Obama administration when it comes to foreign policy and has deliberately decided to use Iran to run its sort of agenda and also at the same time disempower Israel, which the Democrats, Obama, have a bunch of issues with in terms of America, that they want to kind of break that nexus between the two powers?
Yeah, I think it's broadly true that the Biden administration is a kind of continuation of sort of the interrupted Obama administration. Look, if you remember what Obama made his priority, literally his priority in the Middle East, getting a deal with Iran, getting the nuclear weapons deal, the so-called JCPOA, getting a nuclear weapons deal, which let's face it, what did it actually do? It supposedly extended the amount of time that Iran would be able to develop a nuclear weapon in exchange for really significant economic benefits, the lifting of sanctions, the ability of Iran to flood the world, to put its oil back on the world markets. It got that deal. Then obviously Trump came in, abrogated that deal immediately. And then, of course, Biden's come back in, has tried to get that deal back on track, but failed. But in the absence of getting that deal and giving Iran that restoring Iran's economic power, what they've tried to do is they've tried to do other deals with Iran. We've had that deal just a few weeks ago where they transferred $6 billion to Iran to be held actually, outside Iran, but in exchange for hostages. And again, they've been building up Iran. Now, again, I'm not suggesting here that there's some, although there are some very very, very interesting stories, as I'm sure you know, James, about the people inside the administration who've been working on Iran, in fact, how Iran has developed extraordinarily strong connection with people who've been working on Biden administration policy on Iran, and indeed Obama administration policy. But look, I think they have this misplaced idea that Iran, above all else, needs to be appeased. We need to find some way to just defer the moment which they get a nuclear weapon. That means they've downgraded Israel in their calculations. They've downgraded Israel seeking to achieve these agreements, the Abraham Accords, these agreements with Arab countries. And I'm afraid they've empowered Iran again. And Iran obviously is Hamas's paymasters. They have tremendous influence over Hamas. And I don't think there's any question that this terrible attack we've seen in Israel has been brought about partly because Iran has enabled Hamas to get the kind of weapons and also to reestablish its kind of reputation in the region. So it is a real flaw. We've had 20 years of failed American policy in the Middle East, and the Biden administration is kind of doubling down on it.
Gerard Baker, thank you so much. I'm going to have to leave it there, but read his stuff in the Australian and the Wall Street Journal and buy his book as well. Thank you so much, Gerard Baker.